No one noticed the footprints at first. They noticed the silence. After the blizzard, the kind that screams for 12 straight hours and then dies like it never existed, the small American suburb woke up, sealed inside snow. No cars, no plows, no distant highway noise. Just houses crouched under white weight and a sky the color of old bruises. Phones barely worked, radios spat static. The only road out vanished beneath drifts tall enough to swallow fences. It felt temporary at first, an inconvenience, something to joke about while shoveling, until the first set of tracks appeared. They didn't come from the street corner or the woods. They started in the middle of the road. Perfectly spaced impressions pressed deep into untouched snow, as if someone had simply arrived there. The tracks moved with intention, not wandering, not slipping, straight toward a single house at the end of the block, up the driveway, onto the porch, and then they stopped. No return prints, no sign of turning around, just an abrupt ending at the front door, the rest of the porch smooth and undisturbed. Neighbors gathered in heavy coats, breath fogging, boots crunching nervously. Someone laughed too loud and said it was probably a prank. Someone else said the storm must have played tricks on the snow. No one stepped closer. More tracks were found before noon. Different sizes, different depths, all the same pattern, appearing from nowhere, walking directly to doors, garages, back entrances, ending there, always there, and never at random houses. By afternoon, a sick realization settled in. The homes marked by the footprints belonged to people with quiet reputations. Not criminals, not monsters, just people who years ago had made small decisions in winter. A driver who hadn't stopped for a man waving on an empty road. A family who ignored pounding at the door during a power outage. A woman who closed her blinds on someone shivering outside her porch. Nothing dramatic, nothing anyone confessed out loud. The snow remembered. As night fell, the wind returned, carrying sounds that didn't belong to it, coughing, whispering, the faint scrape of movement on wood. Porch lights flickered on by themselves. Ice began to melt in hand-shaped patches on doors, despite the cold tightening its grip. The footprints came back where they had ended, only now they were wet. And somewhere inside one of the houses, a lock clicked, not from someone opening the door, but from something on the other side, testing it. The neighborhood finally understood. The storm hadn't trapped them in. It had brought something back that never reached warmth. And it was going door to door, finishing the walk it started years ago. By the second night, no one pretended it was coincidence. The footprints hadn't spread evenly. They hadn't marked every house, or even most of them. They had chosen. And once people started comparing addresses, old memories surfaced like bruises pressed too hard. A man stood in his kitchen, staring at his back door, the radio murmuring static behind him. He hadn't told anyone why his house was marked, but his hands shook whenever someone mentioned the winter from 10 years ago, the one where a hitchhiker had knocked during a snowstorm, and he'd watched from the hallway until the knocking stopped. Across the street, a woman scrubbed her porch again and again, even though the snow kept falling clean. Her tracks had appeared at dawn, small and light, ending inches from the doorframe. She told neighbors it must be a mistake, that she'd always helped people, that she volunteered, that she wasn't like that. But at night, she cried quietly, remembering the sound of fingernails on glass. The group chat turned ugly. Accusations slipped between updates. Old grudges found new teeth. People asked questions they didn't really want answered. Why your house? Did you see who came? What did you do? The footprints returned after sunset. They didn't always come alone anymore. Some appeared while people watched, snow compressing step by step without a body to cast it. Others formed behind houses, along fences, through yards no one had walked through since summer. The wind carried voices now, too, shaped to ignore. Short phrases, please, names whispered wrong. One man tried to shovel his driveway clear of the tracks. The moment his shovel scraped through the last print, the metal frosted over instantly. When he dropped it, the footprints reappeared behind him, closer to the door than before. Another family stacked furniture against their entrance. By morning, the prints ended inside the living room. They didn't lead back out. No one found blood, no broken windows, no forced locks, just rooms colder than the rest of the house, breath frosting indoors, and walls streaked with melted snow that refroze into thin, reaching shapes. It became clear then the doors were not barriers. They were invitations that had already been given long ago. Late that night, the power cut out completely. Darkness swallowed the neighborhood, broken only by moonlight reflecting off endless white. From house to house, porch lights flicked on by themselves, one after another, like a signal traveling down the street. And with each light, a new set of footprints appeared below it, waiting, patient, certain. Because the snow wasn't guessing anymore. It knew exactly who was next. On the third day, people stopped going outside, not because of the cold, but because of what the cold was carrying. From behind windows, through thin curtains and frosted glass, shapes could be seen moving where the street should have been empty. They didn't rush, they didn't wander. They moved with the stiff patience of something that had nowhere else to be. At first, they were mistaken for shadows, then for tricks of snowfall and moonlight. But shadows didn't leave prints. The footprints were changing. They were no longer uniform. Some dragged on one side, as if a leg no longer bent properly. Others were uneven, with long gouges beside them, like fingers trailing through snow for balance. A few sets were accompanied by shallow handprints, 5 elongated marks pressed deep, pulling forward. One boy pointed at a window and asked his mother why the man outside wasn't blinking. She dragged him away before he could finish the sentence. Those who dared to look closely described the same thing, figures standing just beyond porch lights, just far enough that details refused to settle. Faces blurred by frost, mouths opening and closing slowly, shaping words the wind tore apart. Skin stretched tight and pale, as if it had been exposed to cold far longer than it was meant to survive. They looked wrong in subtle ways, arms slightly too long, necks held at painful angles, feet bare, blackened, leaving wet impressions that smoked faintly before freezing again. They did not knock. They waited. Inside one house, a woman sat on her kitchen floor with her back against the cabinets, staring at the door leading to the garage. The footprints outside it were small, child-sized. They had appeared that morning. She remembered the winter 15 years ago, the school bus accident, the storm, the call she never made because she didn't want to drive icy roads for someone else's emergency. The handle began to turn, not sharply, not forcefully, just enough to test it. In another house, a man heard footsteps on his stairs, though the prince outside had stopped at the front door. Each step creaked slowly, carefully, like someone afraid the stairs might collapse beneath them. When he opened his bedroom door, the hallway was empty, but colder than the rest of the house by several degrees. The footprints appeared at the top step an hour later. By nightfall, the neighborhood was no longer quiet. Crying drifted between houses, so did arguments, confessions shouted into the dark, promises screamed through locked doors. Some begged the figures outside for forgiveness, some cursed them, some opened their doors willingly, convinced that was what the snow wanted. Those houses went dark first. No screams, no struggle, just the sound of wind rushing in, followed by silence so complete it felt deliberate. And as the moon climbed higher, the figures began moving more freely. No longer limited to doors, no longer waiting, they walked the streets now, leaving paths of thawing snow behind them, gathering at intersections, turning their heads toward houses that hadn't yet been marked, toward people who thought they were safe. The snow had finished remembering. Now it was choosing who would feel the cold next. By the fourth day, the neighborhood understood there was a pattern. Not just who was being visited, but how. The houses that survived longest shared something in common. Their doors were open. Not wide, not welcoming, just unlocked, just enough to let cold seep inside like a held breath. The people inside sat awake, layered in blankets, watching frost crawl across walls as if the house itself were learning fear. Those homes were marked, too. Footprints stopped at their thresholds like everywhere else, but the figures outside did not try to enter. They stood still, waiting. It didn't take long for the wrong conclusion to spread. If we open the door, someone whispered over a battery-powered radio, maybe it'll pass us by. So people began to try. A man cracked his front door and set a steaming mug on the porch. The liquid froze solid in seconds, but the footprints at his steps faded by morning. His house was spared, for now. Another family opened their garage and ran heaters inside all night, filling the space with warmth and noise and desperate hope. The prints never crossed the concrete. Word traveled fast. Doors opened, lights stayed on. People sat with coats on inside their own homes, staring at doorways like they were altars. But the snow was listening. That night, new footprints appeared. They led not to doors, but away from them. Tracks formed inside houses, starting at open thresholds and moving deeper, as if something had accepted the invitation and decided to explore. Furniture shifted slightly. Frost formed along the edges of mirrors. Breathing was heard from empty rooms. The figures no longer waited outside those homes. They were already in. One man felt a hand settle on his shoulder while he slept in a chair by his open door. The touch burned with cold so sharp it blistered. When he screamed, his breath came out in clouds thick enough to hide the room. In another house, a woman tried to close her door after hearing movement inside. It refused to budge, frozen in place from the other side. Something leaned against it gently, patiently, like it had all the time in the world. The rule became clear too late. The snow did not want warmth, it wanted acknowledgement. Those who pretended kindness now, opening doors, offering heat, were being treated as liars. The footprints inside their homes were heavier, deeper, as if whatever walked there carried disappointment. Only the houses where doors remained closed, where lights were off, where no excuses were made, those were approached carefully. The figures lingered longer outside them. Sometimes they left without entering at all, as if listening, as if judging. By morning, several homes stood silent and dark, frost sealing them shut from the inside, and across the neighborhood, the remaining residents realized the truth that chilled them more than the storm ever could. There was still a choice, but it wasn't about opening the door. It was about finally admitting, out loud, who deserved the cold in the first place. By the fifth night, people started talking to the snow. Not praying, confessing. Windows were cracked open just enough for voices to carry. Men and women sat on their floors, backs against doors, speaking into the cold like it was a priest that never interrupted. They admitted things they had never told spouses, friends, or themselves. I thought someone else would stop. I didn't think they'd actually die. I was scared. I didn't want trouble. The wind carried their words away and brought nothing back. At first, some thought it worked. A few houses went untouched for hours longer than expected. Footprints paused at sidewalks, lingered, then faded. Hope crept back in, thin and dangerous. Then the snow answered. New figures arrived that night, emerging from the storm, already standing upright, as if they had been waiting just beyond sight. These were clearer than the others. Their faces held expressions now, not anger, not hunger, but recognition. They stopped outside homes where confessions had been loudest, and they shook their heads. Inside one house, a man finished admitting how he'd driven past a stalled car years ago, headlights briefly catching a woman waving both arms. He sobbed when he finished, pressing his forehead to the door. On the porch, the footprints deepened. A voice slipped through the wood, soft and ruined. "That's not what you said then." The temperature inside the house dropped so fast the windows cracked. Elsewhere, a couple argued in whispers, blaming each other for the winter night they never spoke about. The snow outside their door formed two separate sets of tracks, one larger, one smaller, that circled each other like predators deciding who would fall first. When the door finally burst inward, only one set of footprints led back out. It became clear what the confessions really were. Not apologies, evidence. The snow didn't want regret spoken safely years later. It remembered the words that hadn't been said when breath still mattered, when hands still worked, when a door opening would have changed everything. Those words were the only ones that counted. By dawn, several houses stood open to the storm, interiors hollowed by cold, chairs tipped over, blankets frozen stiff. Footprints wandered through rooms like they had been searching for something specific and failing to find it. In the center of the neighborhood, at the four-way intersection no one used anymore, the figures began to gather. They stood close together now, shoulders brushing, steamless breath rising in unison. All of them turned their heads toward the remaining houses at once, not accusing, expectant, as if waiting for the neighborhood to finally understand one last thing. The snow wasn't here for forgiveness. It was here to balance what had been left unfinished. And there were still too many warm houses. On the sixth night, the snow finally allowed the illusion of escape. Just before dusk, someone noticed the main road looked different. The drifts that had risen like walls were lower, smoother, almost passable. The wind eased, and for the first time since the storm, the sky lightened instead of darkening. Hope surged recklessly. People emerged from houses that had been shrinking around them for days. Engines coughed to life.
Headlights cut clean paths through falling snow. The footprints, for once, were gone from the streets. It felt like permission. A convoy formed without discussion. Trucks, SUVs, anything that could move. They drove slowly, carefully, afraid the road might vanish again if rushed. For a mile it held. Then the first car stopped. Not skidded, not crashed, stopped, as if the driver had simply decided there was nowhere else to go. Others braked hard behind it, horns blaring, fear snapping the silence apart. Ahead of them, the road ended, not in snow, in footprints. Hundreds of them, packed tightly together, layered and overlapping, all facing inward. The road surface beneath them was bare and wet, steaming faintly in the cold. The prints didn't move, but they felt aware, like eyes turned toward the cars. The engines died at the same time. Doors unlocked themselves. People inside felt the same pressure in their ears, the same sudden memory rising, uninvited. Headlights cutting through snow, a figure in the road, a choice made in seconds. The figures emerged then, stepping out from the trees lining the road. They stood close enough now to see details clearly. Frost-bitten skin split at the knuckles, lips pulled back from dark teeth, eyes clouded but focused. They did not block the way. They were the way. Those who stayed in their cars were found the next morning, doors open, seats empty, frost blooming where bodies had been. Footprints led from each vehicle, not away from the road, but into the mass of prints already there. The road remained open after that. Too open. Snow receded from the streets inside the neighborhood as well, revealing pavement no one remembered seeing so clearly. The footprints began moving freely now, crossing lawns, cutting between houses, gathering momentum. The truth settled like ice in the lungs. The storm had never been keeping them in. It had been keeping something else out. Now that the road was open, the snow no longer needed the houses one by one. It had a direction, and it was leading everything, living and dead, toward the same cold place where no doors existed at all.
After the road opened, the neighborhood stopped feeling like a place. It felt like a corridor. The footprints no longer hesitated at houses. They moved with confidence now, streaming toward the main road in long, uneven lines. Some were fresh and deep. Others looked old, half erased, as if they had been walking this way for years and were only now visible. People who remained inside felt a pull, not physical but mental. A pressure behind the eyes, a certainty that staying put was wrong, that movement was required. Those who resisted grew colder faster than the houses around them. Frost crept along skin, fingers stiffened, breath slowed. It wasn't punishment, it was correction. The figures passed through yards openly now. Up close, they were unmistakable. Not ghosts, not memories. They were bodies shaped by the moment they were abandoned, clothes frozen into unnatural folds, hair clumped with ice, expressions fixed somewhere between hope and realization. Some carried injuries that matched old stories, a broken leg from a fall no one stopped for, blue hands curled like they had once pounded on glass. They did not touch the living unless necessary. They didn't need to. People began opening their doors on their own, not out of fear, out of understanding. A woman stepped onto her porch barefoot, ignoring the pain, staring at the figure waiting at the bottom of her steps. She nodded once. The figure nodded back. They walked together into the street,
their footprints merging. In one house, a man tried to fight it. He barricaded himself in a bathroom, stuffing towels under the door. By morning, his footprints led calmly down the hallway, past the door he never opened. The bathroom was warm, empty. At the edge of the neighborhood, where the road dipped into white nothingness, the footprints formed a wide, flowing path. The figures stood on either side, guiding, herding, waiting. They were no longer angry, they were complete. Those still alive understood the final rule without anyone saying it aloud. No one was being taken, they were being returned to the cold they had once decided belonged to someone else. And the snow, having taught its lesson, began to fall softer now, like it was closing the door behind them. By the 8th day, there were only a few houses left. They stood scattered and dark, untouched by footprints, unvisited by figures. No wet snow on their porches, no frozen handprints on glass, just silence, the kind that feels earned, not spared. The people inside those houses shared one thing: confusion. They searched their memories obsessively, turning winters inside out, hunting for the moment that should have summoned the snow, the night they should have closed a door, the stranger they should have ignored. But nothing came. One woman sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold mug, whispering, "I always stopped." She said it like a defense, like an accusation, even when I was scared. Outside, the procession continued. Footprints flowed past her yard without pausing, as if her house didn't exist. Figures glanced toward it briefly, then looked away. That hurt more than fear, because it meant she had never been part of the balance. In another house, an elderly man stood at his window watching the road fill with tracks. He had once nearly frozen himself, helping someone else out of a ditch, years ago, alone on a back road. He remembered the pain, the numbness, the way the cold had tried to convince him to lie down. No footprints came for him. The realization spread quietly among the remaining few. This wasn't a punishment that could be avoided. It was a sorting. Those who had denied warmth were being returned to the cold. Those who had shared it, even once, even imperfectly, were being left behind. But being left behind wasn't relief. As the last of the figures reached the road, the neighborhood itself began to change. Houses creaked and settled, as if exhaling. Snow pulled back from foundations, revealing ground no one remembered seeing. Street signs leaned at wrong angles, letters blurred, as if the place was forgetting its own name. The untouched houses felt heavier, lonelier, like survivors in a town that no longer existed. One child asked his father where everyone was going. The father watched the endless trail of footprints fade into white and answered honestly, "Somewhere that remembers them." That night, the snow fell again, light and careful, covering the last signs of movement. And for the first time, the houses that remained understood something worse than guilt. They would have to live with what the snow chose to keep.
On the 9th day, the snow stopped completely. No wind, no falling flakes, just a white stillness so absolute it made sound feel illegal. The sky cleared into a pale, endless gray, and for the first time the remaining residents saw how much of the neighborhood was gone. Not destroyed, erased. Entire rows of houses ended abruptly, their foundations dissolving into smooth snowfields. Streets curved where they never had before, looping back on themselves or narrowing into paths that led nowhere.
Mailboxes stood alone, doors hanging open, their numbers rubbed blank. The place was forgetting itself. Those few who remained gathered at the center of what used to be the neighborhood. They didn't call for anyone. They already knew no one would answer. The road where the footprints had flowed outward now looked older than the rest, compacted, dark, worn down as if countless winters had passed there in days. At its edge stood something new, a signpost. No arrows, no names, just a single sentence carved deep into frost-hardened wood. This way was always cold. No one remembered it being there before. Beyond the sign, the road dipped into a white expanse that swallowed distance. Occasionally, shapes moved far out on it, not walking anymore, but drifting, blending into the storm that no longer touched the town. One woman noticed something worse. The untouched houses, the spared ones, were beginning to show prints inside, not at doors, not at windows, beneath floorboards, in basements, in places that suggested not arrival, but origin, as if the cold had not come from outside at all. An elderly man collapsed when he realized the truth. This neighborhood had never been chosen randomly. It had been built around something, a place where winters were cruel, where help had been withheld often enough to soak into the ground. The snow hadn't arrived to collect the guilty. It had arrived to close the account. By evening, the remaining people felt it clearly. The warmth was fading, not abruptly, but steadily. Fireplaces burned lower, generators sputtered. The cold no longer waited for permission. It belonged there now. And as night fell, the final footprints appeared, not leading away from the neighborhood, but circling it, sealing it, so that nothing warm would ever pass through again.
By the 10th day, no one tried to leave. There was nowhere left to go. The remaining houses stood close together now, though no one remembered them being that way before. The spaces where other homes had been were smooth and white, as if they had never existed at all. Roads ended where they shouldn't. The horizon felt nearer, pressed inward like a closing fist. The cold was different. It no longer bit or burned. It settled, a deep, patient chill that soaked through walls, bones, thoughts. Fires went out without warning. Batteries drained even when untouched. Breath fogged constantly, even under blankets. The spared residents gathered one last time, not out of hope, but habit. They stood in the open, surrounded by a town that had quietly stopped being a town. Someone asked the question none of them wanted answered. So what happens to us? The answer came from the snow, not as a voice, but as understanding. They were not survivors. They were witnesses. This place had been left behind on purpose, preserved like a warning carved into ice. The snow had taken those who belonged to it and sealed the rest inside what remained, a living monument. That night, lights appeared beyond the circling footprints, distant, warm, moving. Headlights, engines, a line of cars driving easily through snowfall that never touched the ground. Rescue. The spared people screamed, waved, ran toward the edge of the neighborhood. The cars passed without slowing. Drivers stared straight ahead, faces calm, unaware. The road bent gently around the town, as if avoiding it by instinct. No tire tracks crossed the ring of snow. From above, the neighborhood would have looked like a blank spot, a blur, a place the eye slid past. By morning, the last signs of warmth were gone.
skin numb, thoughts slow, words hard to form. The spared finally understood the final cruelty. Helping once had saved them from the snow's anger, but it had not earned them forgiveness. As the cold closed in completely, the town settled into silence, not abandoned, not destroyed, but perfectly still, waiting. And somewhere far away, winter began again, and someone on an empty road felt the sudden urge to keep driving.